Yo, welcome to Six Slayers, the comic signature show, period. I'm Mike the Six Slayer, chilling with Mark the Honorable Villain. What up, fam?
What's up, Mike? This man is a legendary writer. This man is a legendary artist. This man is the legend. Tell him who we got.
That's right, we have the man, the myth, the legend, Jim Starlin joining us. But before we chat with Jim, please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and please comment. All right. Our next guest, Mark, I don't think there's enough time to say all of the accomplishments of this next guest, but I'm going to give my best attempt. Our next guest is an absolute comic book legend. For Marvel, he co-created Shang-Chi with Steve Englehart. Everybody loves Thanos from the movies, but without this man's mind, there would be no Thanos. Just like that in the snap. For DC, he was a powerhouse penciling in titles like DC Comics Presents and the Batman Family, but the real comic heads know this man had the duties of killing off a Robin. He's here to promote his latest Kickstarter campaign, Dreadstar vs. Dreadstar. Ladies and gentlemen of the Stash Land, we bring to you the one and only Jim Starlin. How you doing, Jim?
Hey there, folks. How you doing? Good, doing good.
Fantastic. We're going to just dive right on in. It's such an honor to have you. We're going to start with Dreadstar, Jim.
Sounds good by me. That's what I'm here for.
Okay. And so a lot of people know that Dreadstar began with Epic Comics, but tell everyone the evolution of Dreadstar from the beginning with the Epic Comics days and then returning now to this new Kickstarter campaign.
Boy, Dreadstar has been all over the place. It started off in Epic Illustrated. He wasn't the main character. A character called Ankadon was the lead. He didn't show up until about the 5th episode, and I immediately fell in love with him, and he took over the book. And from there, we went off to Eclipse Press, where I did The Price, which was Sissy G. Darklock's sort of origin story, a grim little tale. From there, we went to Bizarre Adventures, which was a Marvel black and white book, which we did another Dreadstar out of that. Then Archie wanted to do another Dreadstar story, and start with Archie Goodwin, the editor. He started up the Epic Comic line, and Dreadstar went into that for 40 some odd issues. There was a payment problem with Marvel. It went over the first, went there for 60 issues, did some reprints in places like Slave Labor. Malibu came along, and Peter David wrote a female version, Kala Dreadstar, which was Dreadstar's daughter, supposedly. And that is the basis that we are springing off from for Dreadstar versus Dreadstar. It's Dreadstar finally meeting his daughter again years later. And we're doing sort of a Rashomon kind of thing, where we're also going to be offering, as a side thing, the Peter David, Ernie Colon Dreadstar, which was Kala's story. And we're handling that as the Lord Papal's version of what happened. And Dreadstar versus Dreadstar is Dreadstar's version of what happened and where it goes from there. Different is definitely what we're trying for. The 4th book is going to be called Where's Dreadstar? And somebody is noticeably absent from that particular book. All the other side characters get to play around. And I have just recently finally came up with the title for the 5th book of this series, which ties everything together. These all have been individual stories that you can read by themselves. But when you get to the 5th one, you realize, oh, this is all one story. All this stuff is connected up here. And that will be called Dreadstar and the Good Death.
That's
okay.
I have a question about the process of making this new Dreadstar, because you mentioned that Dreadstar's been on a whole journey of from publisher to publisher, throughout Marvel. I think that's such a unique story.
It wasn't planned, trust me.
But tell us about the process of making it, as far as the art, the art collaborations, the writing collaborations, just assembling all that together. What's that been like in this new iteration?
In the old days, we used to do it all on the board. Everything was done right on the drawing board. Now we got the computers, and that has made a big difference, especially in the coloring and the lettering. I'm working with a different inker now than back in the old days. I worked in the old days with everyone from Al Milgram to Klaus Janson, Dan Green. I just go on. I had dozens of different inkers over the years. Now I'm working with very talented Jamie Jameson. She's out in LA. I'm in New York. I sit there and come up with the story. I may talk it over with her a bit. She's given me some good ideas along the line. That's why I put her on the cover as by Jim Starlin and Jamie Jameson, because she contributes more than just the inking. I pencil it, FedEx it out to her. She inks it, she scans it, sends it back to me. I color it on the computer. It goes off to Jack Morelli, who is going to be our letterer from now on, and he letters it. And it all goes to Monkey Wrench, and they do their magic and put it all together and figure out what's going to be in the last 8 or 10 pages, whatever it is that we have to fill up with. And we go from there. And then the Kickstarter happens.
Jim, I finally got to meet Jamie at LA Comic-Con. You're not only a legendary writer, but Jamie helped you come back into comics. You started out your career as an artist. Legend has it you suffered a hand injury and you could no longer perform penciling duties. Can you explain how your return to penciling coincided with your return to Dreadstar?
Okay, that's a story all into itself. I got caught in a compressed air explosion and dislocated my cornea, shredded this ear, and blew a big hole in my hand between the thumb and the forefinger, about 1 inch deep. I remember being in the room with it, the hospital room, the emergency room, and they'd dab it off and I'd say, boy, that's a crater. And so for about 3 years after that, every time I tried to sit down and pencil, my hand would cramp up terribly. The muscles were just not there. During that entire time, I was doing a lot of different exercises, squeezing rubber balls all the time while I'm watching movies or anything television. And during that time, I was going to conventions and just signing books because I couldn't draw anymore. Used to dream about drawing, but I'd come back up and get up and do 5 minutes and my hand would ache and I'd have to go run it underneath cold water. But during that same time, we were doing the Dreadstar omnibuses, and all of that had to be remastered and colored. We scanned the books, and then I went in personally myself and worked it so it would be a good product. Got the blacks black, the whites white, and the colors more vibrant, especially on the first issues, the first comic issues. So I forgot to put, first was in there in the mix too. I think I forgot them in the mix when I was talking earlier. But they have really bland, dull colors, gray, so I vibrated all of them up. But what I was doing was I was working with a stylus, which you didn't have to hold as hard as a pencil. And I didn't realize it, but that was doing physical therapy also. And then Jamie Jameson comes along. And she was working with Keith Giffen, inking some stuff for him. And my agent for conventions is Spencer Beck. And Spencer had dinner with Jamie one night, and she begged him to talk to me into doing a Dr. Doom for her. Not Thanos, she wanted Dr. Doom. She's a big Dr. Doom fan. And I just said, I'm going to blow this one off. I'm not going to forget it. I'm going to forget about this one. I'm not going to do this. I'm not drawing, so I'm not going to drive myself crazy. But I kept running into Jamie at the conventions, and she kept bugging me. I was going, oh, please do that. Please do that drawing for me. So finally I said, okay, I'm tired of this. So I went back to my hotel room one night with a pencil and started drawing. And much to my surprise, my hand did not cramp up. It was the therapy, it was the squeezing rubber balls, and it was Jamie pestering me to do this. And so I did her up this Dr. Doom little thing, nothing big. And she liked it. And the next convention I was at, she was at the table next to me, and she was supposed to be with Keith. and he didn't show. And she was sitting there not knowing what she was going to do with herself. And I had, because I had started drawing, I had done up some convention sketches. And I said, well, if you're not doing anything, why don't you ink a couple of these things? We'll split the whatever we sell them for afterwards. And then she did them, and I thought, geez, this is really good. So I started talking to Ominous at the time. That was the publisher I first started off with, Dreadstar Returns. And basically, they said, let's do a 100-page book. And I said, okay. And I needed an inker, and I ran into Jamie again, and I said, how would you like to ink this book? And she said, yes. And then I sent her the pages, and she started freaking out, of course. I have to ink a 100-page book. And she was working at Neil Adams's studio out there in LA at Krusty Bunkers. And she just kept sitting at, I think about 2 days, she just sat there looking at the board, not putting any ink down. And Neil finally came by and went, just put down a fucking line. And she did. And that went from that. And it was, that first job was a real tough one because it was right in the middle of COVID. And Jamie got COVID very seriously twice.
Oh, wow.
Time. She tells a story about how one of the pages that Two-Town is in the story vomiting, she actually vomited on. So we got that out, and we've been working together on these books. She's the inker on Dreadstar versus Dreadstar, and she's in the midst of working on Where's Dreadstar right now.
Jim, with this new campaign on Kickstarter, are there some different products or rewards you guys are offering for the backers?
The only one I know of at this point, we haven't got it together. Dark Horse is going to become our distributor of the soft covers and going into comic book shops. And I did 3 covers for the 3 omnibuses, the new ones. And Jamie got it mixed up, and she inked them on blue lines. And so the pencils were never touched. So what we're going to do is do a lithograph of the pencils, original size. And that's going to be one of the sidebar things that they have. I know we got a couple other things, but I can't remember what they are at this point.
That's good enough for us, man. Yeah. That's awesome. That's news to us.
Yeah, we might put the logo on top too, because there's a lot of big dead white space on top.
Well, all right, we're switching gears real quick. Jim, you've written a lot of deaths. Death of Captain Marvel, death of Jason Todd, death of the New Gods. So it begs the question, are you the designated hitman for the comic publishers? Are you Robert De Niro on The Irishman?
It seems to be the case at this, back in the old days. Of course, now I'd like to say I've changed my ways, but my 5th book is called Dreadstar and the Good Death. So that kind of blows that one. No, basically we did the Death of Captain Marvel, and that seemed to put me into that groove. Later on, I was doing Batman, and I hated doing Robin. I just thought the whole idea of going off and fighting crime with a teenage sidekick was just ludicrous, especially if you dress them up in primary colors while you're in black and gray. They were going to do a book on AIDS up at DC, and they put out a suggestion box, and they said, who should we give AIDS to? So I loaded it up with Robins. They recognized my handwriting, they threw all mine out. And in the end, Jimmy Olsen ended up getting the vote. He was supposed to get AIDS. But then they found out that the actor who played Jimmy Olsen in the Christopher Reeves Superman was gay, and that freaked them all out. So the whole project was but then Denny O'Neil came up with the idea of doing the phone-in vote on whether he lives or dies. And
right.
Approached me, and I said, I'll be glad to do that. And we actually had 2 different pages at the end where Robin either lives or dies, and surprisingly, the vote was very close. It was only 72 votes different out of 10,000. Statistically, a dead heat. I was surprised because I think you fans are much more ghoulish than you actually are, obviously. I thought he was going to be gone in a minute, but or it may have been that Bob Kane voted for him to live a lot. I don't know. Who knows?
I have another quick question, real quick. It just dawned on me. You worked a lot with Jim Aparo, another Jim. As an artist, as a fellow artist, what could you say about Jim Aparo's impact on the Batman line?
He was Batman there for the longest time. I'd say at least half the books that were being produced there for a while, Jim was drawing. He was the ultimate craftsman. Back in his Fawcett days, he would sit there and pencil, ink, and letter a page a day. And he's kept that journeyman kind of mentality going when he came over to DC and started doing Aquaman, I think, at first, and then other things, and eventually Batman. And they just kept him on there. The odd thing about working with Jim is we never met until years after we were done with Death in the Family.
Oh, wow.
He lived up in Connecticut. I sent the scripts in. I sent the scripts in to Denny. He would send them off to Aparo. And I remember when I finally got to that page where Batman's carrying Robin off, that big double page spread, or single page, I said, Jim, this is going to be the one this is the drawing you are going to be remembered by. And, I just wrote it in there as a throwaway. And years later, when we did finally meet at a convention, he said, you are absolutely right. I don't know how many of those damn things I've signed over the years. They always want to go to that page for the signature.
That's awesome.
Jim, I have to keep the page on collaborations. You've collaborated with Swamp Thing co-creator Bernie Wrightson and Hellboy creator Mike Mignola. How'd you end up working with Bernie Wrightson on Batman the Cult and Mike Mignola on Cosmic Odyssey?
Well, Cosmic Odyssey was a DC project. They had something called the Book of Magic, which was a series that sort of mapped out what their mystical universe looked like. And they approached me to do the same thing with their science fiction characters. I stayed with that idea for about 5 minutes and then went off and did Cosmic Odyssey. I did it there. And Mike got pulled in on it somewhere along the line. And we were just going to town there. And DC's editors and that finally realized that we were not doing a map of the science fiction universe. We were doing a different story entirely, and they really hit the roof on that one. They said, well, we're just going to dump this book out there, no promotion, and we're just going to let it die its own death, and no one will ever think about it again. And they were really mad about it. They were saying, well, we have to rethink about what we're going to do with you. They've been paying me royalties on that book for the last 40 years, so it didn't quite work out the way they had planned. Working with Bernie, Bernie lived up here in the Catskill Mountains with me. He was a neighbor. And the trick with Bernie was if you wanted him to do a book, you had to come over at least once a week, look at the pages and gush, which was very easy to do because it was Bernie Wrightson art.
Right.
Otherwise, he would get bored and he would lose interest in the job. He was always quitting jobs. And Ron Marz and I found out that if you come over and do this, you could get books out of it. We started with the big change over at Marvel with the Thing Hulk book. We did the Weird together. Then we did the Cult, which was DC's biggest seller that year. It was a hit. It was Bernie Wrightson. He was going to sell. So after that, Bernie and I said, let's do a sequel to the Cult. So we approached DC and they said, no, we want Bernie to go over and do a Swamp Thing job with Len Wein. One problem, and I pointed it out to them, but they just didn't want to hear it. Len lived in LA, Bernie lived in New York. Well, they got 10 pages out of Bernie and he quit. And they were really pissed at him and they were pissed at me because they figured I had something to do with it, which I didn't. So we took the plot that we had for the sequel to the Cult, and we took it over to Marvel, and I got to do a 4th series with Bernie called The Punisher POV. And that was basically a follow-up to the Cult.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the only trouble was that Batman has personality and character, and the Punisher doesn't. So there was a lot of extensive rewriting on that because I had to pull in more of the side characters because there was nothing to do with the Punisher. So, but it worked out. I mean, it was beautiful covers he did, and just the interior artwork. It was just another tremendous job. You know, so working with Bernie was always a pleasure. Plus we were just plain old friends. We'd go snowmobiling and tubing and doing all sorts of. We used to hang out regularly.
Jim, you were also during the early days of Marvel. Can you tell us what it was like in the Marvel Bullpen with Stan Lee and others?
It was one big room with 2 little rooms at the back. And the big room was all filled up with cubicles, and all us people who worked there for coloring and the production, and I started off being their sort of de facto art director. They had never had an art director before. I'm not sure how they did the covers, but my first job was sitting down in the morning, pulling out all these Xeroxes of the interior of the book, look through them and figure out what cover should be on it. And then I would sketch up a cover, and they would, once it was approved, it would be sent off to somebody like John for Buscema or Gil Kane, somebody who really knew how to draw. I didn't know how to draw all that good at that time. And but before we did that, I'd have to take it in to Stan, and Stan would show up at noon, and I'd go in with my sketches, and he'd look at him and he'd go, terrific, but, and then he would take off his glasses and he'd put them on the seat, and he would crawl up on the desk, and he would act out how he wanted the character to look. And I would do a little quick sketch, just, stick figure sketch, because I remember where I was going. And then I would wait, because about 1 out of every 5 or 7 times, he'd forget where he put his glasses and he'd sit on them. And you'd hear this breaking sound. And he'd reach over to the intercom, which I had back to this day still, push the button and go, "Holly, I did it again." She would come in with new glasses and take away the rubble. And it was a really fun time for a few months there while I did that job. But then Roy gave me a couple of jobs to actually draw love story and horror stories, that sort of thing, fillers. And they hired Frank Giacoia as their first official art director at that point.
I got to ask this question. We just recently interviewed Ron Marz like a couple weeks ago, and he basically told us you discovered him. You were his entryway into comics. And so I just wanted to know, what potential did you see in Ron Marz that made you think he could do comics?
Well, it was kind of desperation on my part too. I was writing the Silver Surfer, and the sales went up, and they wanted all sorts of different things here, like the Thanos quest, and then the Infinity Gauntlet. And I was still writing the Surfer, and I suppose I could have done it by myself, but I thought, well, I don't want it. I was also writing novels at the time, so there was a big backload of work, and I knew Ron from parties over at Bernie's Halloween parties, and we played racquetball together too. That was another thing I did with Bernie. And so I said, "Hey, I'm going to do a rough draft. You do a polish, and then I'll go over your polish and we'll set it in here." And it worked out really well. This was on the Silver Surfer book. And when I eventually just decided I didn't want to do the Silver Surfer anymore, they gave it to Ron. I said, "Give it to Ron. He's doing half the job already. He knows where we're going." And that was his beginning of his career, I guess.
He said he hasn't looked back since.
He hasn't blamed me yet, so I guess it worked out all right for him.
Right. All right, let's switch back to the Infinity Saga and its impact on popular culture. Did Marvel Studios, when they were prepping for the Avengers movies, did they consult you in any way? And did you think Thanos would be this big of a hit?
No, I never thought Thanos was going to be in the movies at all. I just thought he was too strange and esoteric. In fact, nobody wanted to do Thanos in the books but me. If you look back, I mean, Ron Marz did a couple of stories with the Defenders and that, but other than that, there was one Mark Waid story, Kazar, where he appears. And he only appears in that because originally there was an X-Men villain who Kazar was fighting, and they said, you can't use that character. And so Adam Kubert, I think it was, had to go through and, or Andy, I forget which one it was, had to go through and redraw all the villains. And they said, use Thanos. And so when that came out, I sort of went, no, that's really odd. I mean, the cover be just Thanos sitting there with a splat, which used to be Kazar. But in the book, they fought it out.
Jim, last question. Circling back to Dreadstar, is there something that we haven't talked about that you want the fans to know? Any more details about the Dreadstar Kickstarter or any upcoming appearances?
There'll be notices on my Facebook and Instagram. Monkey Wrench will be doing it. We're doing these interviews. We've had a good turnout on the books up until this point. Hope we do it again. Basically, we're just looking to get enough money to do the printing. I'm sort of financing the art here as we go along, and the story, I guess, slave labor. And basically, the only thing I'd like to say is I am really proud of these books. These are labors of love. Underneath this poster is the next page I'm working on. I decided I needed color once I looked at the screen. But I'm just loving doing this. And I know it was set to do only 5 books, but I think I'm going to do at least a 6th one. I'm working out a deal with some different artists to work on the 6th book. I'm thinking about calling it because there's going to be 5 different stories rather than one big story. And I've got one artist who's already drawn a Darklon, the Mystic, and Syzygy Darklock story. And I'm talking to a couple other folks here, and I'm going to do draw at least one of the stories in the book. So it'll be a little bit different.
Thank you so much for coming back and joining us, taking time to promote your Kickstarter campaign on Dreadstar versus Dreadstar. The dream come true for us. You always have a home here on the Six Layer Station, so thank you once again. Well, that's all for our show. If you like what you see, please subscribe and hit the like button. This is Six Layers. I'm Mike, speaking for Mark and Jim Starlin. We are out. Peace!
6 Layers.